Namaskar to all who are watching and a very warm welcome to the Festival of Bharat. We are an online forum that creates authentic, balanced, and pertinent content on diverse topics relevant to Bharat, and in doing so, serving the cause of Sanatan Dharma. Our guest speakers are distinguished, accomplished individuals who, as domain experts from various fields, are reshaping opinions and perspectives about Bharat by dispelling misinformation and myths that have shrouded the truth. Joining me today on the eve of one of Bharat's much loved festivals, Makar Sankranti, Pongal, or Lodi, as it is known in the north, is Dr. Subhash Kak ji, a renowned scientist, scholar, and author whose expertise ranges from physics, computer technology, astronomy to the Vedas, and other subjects. Dr. Subhash Kak is a Regents Professor at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, USA. His research is on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, history of science, and Vedic studies. He is currently a member of the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, and Innovation Advisory Council. Nearly 30 years ago, he made the surprising discovery that the ancient Indians knew that the sun and the moon are approximately 108 times their respective diameters from the earth. This knowledge was coded into temple architecture, in the 108 poses of the Indian classical dance, and the 108 prayer beads of the Japamala. He was the editor of the Indian subcontinent area for the UNESCO project on archaeoastronomy sites around the world. His work has been showcased in popular media channels, including Discovery, History, the History Channel, PBS, Public TV in Europe, and in several documentaries on science and art. He is the author of 20 books that include his autobiography, The Circle of Memory. Namaste, Subhash ji, and a happy Makar Sankranti to you. So happy and honored to have you on our show.
Thank you, Pujita ji. I'm delighted to be a part of this wonderful series, many segments of which I have already seen. So delighted to be a part of it.
Subhashi, as I understand it, you are based out of Stillwater, Oklahoma, in the US. So is that right?
Right. It's almost in the middle of the continental US. And Oklahoma, the climate is not too cold, not too hot, so it's a pleasant place to live.
Right. What is the situation, the COVID, Omicron situation there, and how is, I hope your family is vaccinated and you're all well. What's it like there?
Yeah, we're doing very well, and things are open here. And we also spent some time in Miami, which is where our children live. Right. And things are quite open there because, there's been, unfortunately, a kind of a political divide in the response to COVID. And the southern states, which are Republican, have been more open in the sense of they have kept the economy going along, while in the north, there have been a greater alarm over it, and more lockdowns in the north than in the south. Those schools are open here and everything is open.
Right. Has there been any resistance to vaccination and the vaccination drive? How is that going? I mean, I believe because there were spurts of resistance to, people, one saw how people were protesting, wearing masks and the impositions put down by the government on vaccination and such like. How is that? I mean, is that only in certain pockets, or was that more?
Maybe 20-30% of the people are not vaccinated because they think that perhaps they are healthy, they don't require it, the danger for the younger people is minimal. And then there is a lot of resistance to the idea of vaccinating young kids, because there are some people in the medical establishment who want kids as young as 5 to be vaccinated, or perhaps even younger. So there is tremendous resistance to that idea. But we don't know. I think there are a lot of different opinions, and some people are more alarmed about about COVID than some others. And as we know, there's been this celebrated case of Novak Djokovic in Melbourne, Australia, who has not been vaccinated. And there was this whole drama of his immigration hearing and all that. So there are a lot of people who, for various reasons, and some for medical reasons, don't want to be vaccinated. But a vast majority, I believe, are maybe 60-65%. It's a random number. I don't know the exact figure.
My next question, Subhash, is to do with this term archaeo. I mean, it caught my attention. It's a term that I haven't come across earlier. So you're described as an archaeoastronomer. So what does that really mean? What does that entail?
Archaeoastronomy is the astronomy at the basis of archaeological sites, of ancient sites, like temples. Temples in ancient times were aligned in the cardinal directions, north, south, east, or west, because east is where the sun rises. So often the door or the entrance to the temple was to the east. Now, these directions have changed because the earth keeps on precessing, and it has a period of about 24,000 years. So every 2,000 years, it shifts through one zodiacal sign, or every 1,000 years, it shifts through one nakshatra, since there are 27 nakshatras. So you can look at ancient structures and see the exact directionality of it, and try to figure out as to what it might have meant for the period when it was built. And sometimes there is some deviation from that, which has to do with some astrological factors associated with the king who paid for the building of the temple. And so a lot of history can be extracted. And in India, especially, there was also the factor that the very plan of the temple was as mirroring the entire cosmos. So the distance from the front gate to the Garbhagriha was taken to be equal to 108 units, which is something that you already mentioned. And the perimeter of the temple was taken to be 360. And 360 is, of course, a very cardinal number. This is the number of days in the year. So there was this as well. And then there were other numbers associated with astronomy, which were at the basis of the details. Details also, as we know, of the number of divinities. In Brihad Aranyak Upanishad, there is a dialogue, how many devas are there. And it starts off at 33, but it's and so on. And finally, 3 and 2 and 1.5, because there is a certain paradox associated with our own conception of who we are, because if there was only one, then there couldn't be two. So there is one or two because there is always a separation between consciousness and material reality, right? But we are also consciousness, so it's not just quite two, it's somewhere between 1 and 2.
1 and 2, right. Very, very interesting. This 108, that of course is another, what I mentioned in your introduction. Are there any other such numbers which are, or 108 is also, I mean, if you add them up, it's 9, and 9 is also like a very sacred number in our belief systems, in our faith. So are there any such, I mean, is there any, what is the connection between, are they connected, mathematics, astronomy, and religious principles? Not principles, I don't call them principles, but beliefs. And like you said, the temple, for example, was supposed to be reflective of the cosmos. They say the body is a kshetra, is also a representative. So do you think you could probably, I know that this would be oversimplification, but could you probably bring that concept? Would you be able to throw some light on that concept of numbers?
Yes, lots of numbers. In fact, about 30 years ago, actually, I think it was November of 1992, I was reading a magazine where this American author had mentioned how it's curious that the size of the sun and the moon, looking at them from the earth, is about the same, which is why you have eclipses. And the moment I read that, something flashed in my mind, and I was certain that it had something to do with the very organization of the Rig Veda. So I went to my library and I opened up my Rig Veda and I looked at the very contents and so on. It so turns out that the Rig Veda has a total of 1017 hymns or suktas. And 1017, the Veda is supposed to be Trei Vidya. Trei, because there are three ways in which we can look at reality. There is the subject and object and motion, or looking at it from the perspective of objects, you have earth, the atmosphere, and the sun or the heavens. Trividya, or Bhu, Bhuva, Swaha. Bhu is the earth, Bhuva is the atmosphere, and Swaha, Swar means the sun. So you have the three. So if you take 1017 and divide it by 3, you get 339. Now, what's beautiful is that 339 is 108 times pi. If the sun is 108 its diameter away from you, from sunrise to sunset on 21st of March or 21st of September, which is when the day and the night are equal, you will have 339 disks of the sun from sunrise to sunset. So we see that this number is coded right in the very organization of the Rig Veda. Not just the Rig Veda, if you look at all the Vedas and look at all the mantras in them, they also are related to these fundamental astronomical numbers. And I published a lot of stuff on that in Western and Indian journals in the early 90s. Then I wrote a book called The Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda, where you'll find all these details. And, when we have 108 beats in the Japamala, basically what you're doing is making a symbolic journey from the earth to the sun, which is your inner lamp of consciousness, the divinity, Shiva or Krishna or the goddess, whatever you want to visualize as the lamp of consciousness. So you're making that journey, symbolic journey. Or in Ayurveda, because as you rightly pointed out, the body itself mirrors the cosmos, right? So if you take 108 things and join them, how many meeting points will you have? You'll have 107, right? If you take two things and put them together, you'll have one joining. If you take 108 things, you'll have 107 joinings. So in Ayurveda, the number of marmas, marmasthans, is 107. And this illuminates that. This tells you why it's 107. So these numbers permeate everything. You also have 108 great temples or tirthasthans, right? And so this number was out there, but its true astronomical significance had been sort of forgotten for a couple of thousand years. And so now it's out there, and we can make sense of a lot of stuff in our parampara, in our tradition, in what we do in light of this. And likewise, 108 names of the god or the goddess. So you are invoking or making that journey within you, right? Because normally we are on earth, which is our body. And from there, we want to go inside to the light, Prakash. In fact, in Shaivism, Shiva is also called Prakash, and Prakriti is also called Vimarsh, because the Prakash falls on the brain neural system, which is the heart of Prakriti as far as our body is concerned, looking at it from a neuroscientific perspective. And the whole sadhana then is supposed to be a process by which, since normally you're only looking at the lighting within the mind, right? The mind is a instrument
Mm.
associated with our ego, ahankar, and our memories. So it's an instrument, and the light is falling on it. But how do we turn that light around and be light ourselves so that we become the Shiva that we are, Shivoham, right? And all of us, every human being is the same. You know, this is the most extraordinary way of understanding reality, which we have also discovered now is consistent with the most advanced scientific knowledge. And so now that parallel with scientific knowledge right now has been understood in the domain of, say, physics. But now people are also recognizing that this is what will open further doorways of understanding in psychology itself, because psychology has been more a kind of a machine paradigm, right? You have input and then output. You have stimulus and then you have response. And the individual has been taken out of it. And in fact, this is a crisis of psychology. Where is the individual? Where is freedom? And this is also a crisis of medicine, because in medicine, allopathic medicine, there's no room for the mind. You're only dealing with the body. And what's happening right now is that 60, 70, 80% of medical research cannot be replicated. This is called the reproducibility crisis of modern medicine. And probably, and there's also the placebo effect. 30 to 40% of the people, if they are given sugar pills and told that they're being given a medicine, they'll get well. And placebo effect even works in surgery. If the patient is told that surgery is being performed and the doctor just makes an incision and does nothing and then closes the incision, the patient gets well also, 30 to 40%.
Very interesting.
Yeah, this is incredible. And this is the frontier of medicine right now. But part of the problem is that modern medicine has no room for the mind. And that is the very heart of Indian approach to reality. Indian approach embraces both the body, both the outside, as well as the inside. And that's what's required for sciences as well. And that's the reason why, you know, a lot of thoughtful people are saying that the next fundamental change that will take place in the sciences would be informed by all these Vedic ideas.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And I think I will talk a little bit more about this, Subhashi, because this is the crux of your work as well. And I want you to talk a little bit more as we go further along. But I wanted to come back to Sankranti, because why I want to bring that up is because you know, there has been a disturbing trend of late in India where a lot of the Hindu festivals are constantly come under the cloud of some sort of controversy or the other, and there is a general perception that our festivals are too many, probably a little backward, and have no relevance. So I wanted, perhaps, if you could indulge our viewers, and I'm sure there are many young viewers who don't understand the significance of festivals like Sankranti. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Because, you know, we've had, for example, the whole ban on Jallikattu a couple of years. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
I'm sure you, yes. So would you like to talk a little bit about that, Subhashji? What is the significance of Sankranti and why are these festivals important?
Okay, there are what happens, you know, you look at the motion of the sun across the year. During summer, the sun rises more to the north. In fall or winter, it rises to the south. So this is called the journey of the sun, you know, where exactly it rises to the east. And when it rises, when it's going northwards, that's called Uttarayan. And when it's going southwards, that's called Dakshinayan. Now, the Uttarayan begins right now on 21st of December. And then it goes on till 21st of June. And then the Dakshinayan begins in 21st of June, right? But now, because of the precession of the earth, the seasons are shifting, as I mentioned, 1,000 years per nakshatra, or 2000 years per Rashi, which is the zodiacal sign. And now the Makar Sankranti is being celebrated now on 15th or 14th or 15th of January. And it's not quite the beginning of Uttarayan. The Uttarayan really is on 21st of December. Because in the modern calendar that we use, this is all fixed now. These dates are fixed, and therefore the seasons are going to change. Or their seasons are fixed, 21st of December, right? So what it really means is that Makar Sankranti is one Indian festival which doesn't change its date. So Makar Sankranti was the same as beginning of Uttarayan about 1500 years ago.
Wow.
So it has shifted. But on the other hand, what one can say, and I think that will be accurate, is that while Uttarayan begins on 21st of December, Makar Sankranti is a celebration which comes 3 weeks later. So that's perfectly fine. So in other words, we don't have to necessarily tie it up with the larger astronomical event. Now, to come back to the questions of the festivals, what has happened very tragically over the last 70, 80 years is that the colonization of minds that the English attempted in India, Macaulay and the other followers, because as we know, colonialism was racism. Why did you want to form colonies? Because you thought that you were superior to the others, right? So it was racism. So they came in and they didn't understand. They didn't quite recognize that until the Middle Ages, until the scientific age occurred, which is only 300-400 years ago, India was the most advanced scientific nation in the world, and it was generally recognized so. But India had fallen on hard times, and there are these ups and downs in every civilization and culture. And so they came in. But in spite of that, around 1800, India's share of the world economy has been estimated to be about 25%. By the time the English left, or there are figures, 1918, when the First World War ended, India's share, and this is undivided India, had fallen to 1.8%, from 25% to 1.8%. So the 19th century was a century of horrors as far as India was concerned. And what happened was, first of all, they shut down the Indian educational system, as Dharampal has shown. These English superintendents came in and they said, contrary to what we believe now, because our textbooks are all wrong, contrary to what we have been told, children from all jatis used to attend these temple schools. It's not that education was confined to one jati or the other. And then they shut it down. India's literacy fell down from an estimated 60-70% to as low as 4 or 5% on the English watch. And then because they shut down India's own crafts and they didn't invest in Indian factories as the Industrial Revolution came along in the 1830s. Before that, there had stiff tariffs on Indian products or textiles with which the British could not compete. But after that, once they had their factories going, Indian products could not compete. And this is the reason why, and they did not invest in factories here. So India became extremely poor. There were these famines in India, which have been called, the late Victorian Holocaust. Millions and millions of people died. And it happened slowly. So Indians did not even know what was happening. What was happening. And so what they did, this whole racist view of India, which is what has been incorporated, sadly, in our educational system, has separated us from the true meaning of our culture. And as the great Sri Lankan Indologist Ananda Kumaraswamy said once, literally all that you read about Hinduism in Western texts and their writings and of their Indian followers is wrong. So
Right.
whatever we are told is really not what it is. Superficially, it might appear fine. It's like this whole idea of caste. There is no equivalent to the word caste in any Indian language. We have jati.
Correct.
And when the British census, officers formed across the country in 1880s and 1901 census, they asked people from different jatis, what varna are you? They said, we are jatis. We don't know what varna we are,
Correct.
because every jati was as proud as any other jati. And of course, some had fallen on hard times because of the economic collapse that occurred under the British watch. But the British insisted on pegging them on one varna or the other. And that, they said, you are this varna, which was all false. So the British created this idea of caste, because there is no, every jati is equal, every human being is equal. And every human being has the same purush within, which is what the Shastras or all the Vedas tell us, right? Everybody is Shiva, Shivoham, right? Shiva Aham. So what the British did was they literally handcuffed us by these ideas. And since these ideas have been repeated again and again in these textbooks and through the media, and something terrible has also happened in Indian cinema. Before the Second World War, in the period of great antipathy to the Jews, for example, they were this figure of hate in Europe. So the Jew in British or Western cinema was this very pejoratively. So what the Hindi cinema primarily did was to take those tropes and hung them on the baniya or the pandit, the temple priest. And it's been repeated endlessly. And Indians have been taking this nonsense without rising up, and it's high time. Enough is enough. A lot of what is shown in Hindi cinema is absolutely terrible. In the way all these things are pushed. And the same thing is about the festivals that we started out with in this particular moment, that a lot of that's being pushed by the entertainment industry, by the media, by the Western or the English media in India, is because it's a continuation of the racism which was at the basis of the British Raj. So it's the same attitudes that are being reinforced and repeated again and again, which create a lot of self-hate. So self-loathing. In fact, I wrote an essay on it called Self-Loathing and the Anglosphere. But what's very interesting is self-loathing diminishes the person who does the loathing. The Western, the guy who pretends he's the Englishman sitting in India. And the great South African freedom fighter Nelson Mandela said once, hatred is the poison you drink to kill your enemy, which is what this hate that the successors, the elite who believe that they're successors to the British who rule India, and they must then civilize the rest of the Indians. So this is where a lot of the hate is coming from, but it's only ending up diminishing them. But because look at Indians who have left India and gone all over the world, they're the most successful people. The most successful community in the US, for example, are the Indians. They're successful in everything, as professionals, in politics, as lawyers, as writers. So in India also, the average guy is very proud of who he is, who he or she is, as they should be, because ours is, extraordinary wisdom tradition. And this is what gives us the strength. Not that Indians are any superior to anybody else. All human beings are equal. But it's this wisdom that informs us and strengthens us.
I agree. Yes. There's a certain wisdom, like you rightly pointed out, which I mean, it's not that, like you rightly said, no one's superior, but the culture is embedded with that wisdom, which I think is something that we've lost sight of for many years, and I think it's time to take ownership of that. Subhashji, my next question is to, I mean, I'm going to switch gears and come back to your home ground, which is science. I remember reading an article of yours on Newton. I found that very interesting, where you spoke of certain aspects of him or his life, which I think you called it the dark side of Newton or something. Would you care to talk a little bit just briefly about him? Because I want to bring this up because, you know, again, in tying up with what we just spoke earlier, how in India we tend to revere Western men of science, not really knowing much about, you know, the truth actually. So could you talk a little bit about Newton, what I think most people don't know or are unaware of?
Well, sometimes Newton is seen as the harbinger of the scientific age. And here he saw the cosmos as a clockwork, and gravitation and physical laws, etc., etc. And of course, science took off, Newton and Leibniz and many others. But we often speak of Newtonian physics, and that is supposed to be a departure, let's say, from the way within the narratives in India, from the way physics was done in India. Now, but I think 70 or 80 years ago, it was discovered that much more than his own physics, he had been writing on alchemy. And these books had been hidden because the English elite didn't want the rest of the world to know what Newton had actually spent most of his life doing. Right. And in this, Newton had the most backward ideas, and he was looking at you know, a literal interpretation of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and he believed that the world was going to end in 2012 or something.
12, yeah, right.
Or if it didn't end that soon, maybe 2065, or, you know, this is biblical chronology, which goes back to the creation of the universe in 4004 BCE and all that stuff. So a lot of this stuff was sort of religious mumbo jumbo. And this is more, many times more than what his physics had been. And of course, we should praise his physics. But again, to talk about his physics, what's interesting is that, and this is something that I wrote a book on 5-6 years ago, I went back to the very earliest Indian physics, and that's Kanada. And Kanada did his Vaisheshika Sutras. And according to scholars, they were done about 600 BCE. Now, in Vaisheshika Sutras, Kanada comes up with the most advanced view of looking at reality. In many ways, more advanced than Newton himself. Of course, he doesn't have the law of gravitation, although, you know, gravitation is something that others had also spoken about, like Bhaskaracharya. He didn't have the equation, but he did see that how we make sense of objects in the sky is because gravitation balances out. In fact, Bhaskaracharya mentions that specifically. But Kanada, to come back, Kanada viewed reality as two triangles, one like the Shakti triangle, which consists of Dravya, Karma, and Guna, which means substance, motion, and the properties. So that is one triangle. And the other triangle, which is like the Shiva triangle, consists of Samanya, which is universal, Vishesha, which is particular to the person who's interacting with Prakriti, and then Samavaya, the meeting point of the observer and the observed. You know, it's most incredible. It's as advanced as can be. And this is something which is guiding the evolution of such ideas. Not necessarily, people don't know about Kanada, very few do. But he also had laws of motion, Newton's laws of motion. Of
Mm.
the three laws, he has two in almost exactly the same verbiage.
This is Vaisheshika, Kannada.
Kannada has, for example, he has a law which says to every action there's an equal reaction. Or if you let a object, if you don't interfere with it, it'll stay or keep on moving without changing. So the second law, F is equal to ma, he doesn't have that, but he has it in some sense indirectly, and you can sense that. So it's very, very contemporary view of looking at reality, that as far as properties of the physical universe are concerned, they should be obtained only from the study of substances, their characteristics and their motions, you know, which is as relevant now as it has ever been.
Right. So yeah, so Newton, you said, was probably more also had biblical influences, as in he was shall we say, religiously motivated as well.
He was an alchemist. He was an alchemist. And you know what the alchemists were trying to do? They were trying to convert lead into gold. So this is what their objective was. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. My next question is, Subhash, is about, you've spoken at length on various occasions about the Indian foundations of modern science. And the world, I think, has really acknowledged the fact that Indian rishis, because you mentioned Canada just now, had made tremendous progress and contributed vastly to the field of astronomy, mathematics, and so on. But this is rarely spoken of or even heard of, or people are hardly aware of this. So could you speak a little bit about the Indian foundations of Western science? Western science as we know it, but what have been our contributions that people don't talk about?
Well, we can go back far and talk about astronomy and mathematics. People do recognize. In fact, normally in books, you'll see that zero was done in India about 1800 or 2000 years ago. But then more recent histories also say that probably even the Mayans had a zero, or the Babylonians had a zero. They didn't have the numerical system the way we have it. So people do accept it. And then some popular books say that the Greeks were more into geometry and Indians were more into algebra. And algebra was taken by the Persians and the Arabs, by Umar Khayyam, for example, and others. And then from there, it went to Europe. Now, it's less known that Fibonacci was a famous Italian writer about 800 years ago. Now, what he did, and this is how he introduced Indian math to Europe, he took an Indian book in Arabic and translated that into Latin. And a lot of what is credited to Fibonacci was really Indian mathematics. And he also introduced the Indian numerical system, and the church fought it for a couple of hundred years. And they fought it because the Indian numerical system, going back to Brahmagupta and even prior to that, also had negative numbers, right? Because the moment you write +2, you can also write -2, and +2, -2 is equal to 0, and so on, because you had 0, while the Europeans didn't have 0. So they fought for it. The church fought it. They said, this is devilish. The negative numbers are devilish, and this and that. So you can see what it points to is resistance that cultures have to things which in retrospect appear perfectly reasonable. So that's what happened. But the story of influence or foundations of modern science, Indian foundation of modern science, which are not generally known. In my essay, I pointed out to just a few things. For example, the mathematical logic, which is at the basis of computer science or machines, it's based on mathematical logic. And this mathematical logic was created by three people in England around 1850s. And their names are George Boole, Augustus de Morgan, and Charles Babbage. And in fact, Babbage is even called the father of the computer because he tried to create a mechanical computer. You know, he had program and so on. Now, these three belong to a salon, intellectual salon, which was headed by a fellow called George Everest. And George Everest, as we know, was the Surveyor General of India for 20, 30 years. And in fact, his tomb is still in Missouri. So he used to go to England during the summers and he would call all these people and talk to them about what he had learned. Now, okay, so these people are famous now, but in 1898, George Boole's widow wrote Mary, she wrote a famous essay where she said, look, you know, people should know that George Everest was talking about Navya Nyaya, where all this mathematical logic had already been done in India about 1,000 years prior. And Navya Nyaya, modern scholars show, is perfectly equivalent to all of mathematical logic. So what he was trying to tell these people, and these people acknowledged, because I think Augustus de Morgan also tried to help some other unknown Indian mathematician named Ramachandra publish his stuff. So these guys knew that many of these ideas came from India. So this is one side. The other side is what really sets our modern age apart from older times is quantum mechanics. And from quantum mechanics everything else has changed, you know, chemistry and biology and cosmology. You also have quantum cosmology and so on. Now, the creator of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, he was a Vedantin. He was an Austrian. He was a Vedantin. And in his own autobiography, he says that, look, the central idea of quantum mechanics came to me, he says, from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma. That this Atman is the entire cosmos. So the central idea of quantum mechanics is that this quantum state, a quantum state means a description of a physical system at its most elementary level, is a superposition of all possibilities. You know, it's like normally you're wearing shoes. Your shoes can be brown or black, or they're colorful. They can be blue or red or whatever else, but they can't be brown and black and blue and red at the same time.
Correct.
But in quantum mechanics, that's what you have. You have a system which is all these mutually exclusive things at the same time. All the possibilities, right? Which is what this idea of how can the Atman, which is the smallest and the small, right, can be equal to the entire Brahman. And you have all these paradoxical statements in the Upanishads or in the Vedas, right? Or in, you look at Ishavasya Upanishad, it's the smaller than the smallest, bigger than the biggest. This Atman is, right? That Isha is. So this particular intuition is the heart. The second part of quantum mechanics. Now I'm teaching you quantum mechanics. After this, you can tell others that you know quantum mechanics as well.
Quantum mechanics, I'm an expert.
The second part of quantum mechanics is you have all these superpositions in reality at the same time. But when the mind interacts with this reality, then mind has access to only one of these.
One of these, right.
Only one of these. So, and in quantum mechanics, that's called the collapse of the wave function. Now, in Vedanta, the mind is like the observer. The mind is the observer because the mind has ego, ahankar, and everything else.
Sakshi, right?
Yeah, Sakshi. Well, there are two. In the Veda, it's spoken about Dva Suparna. There are two birds on the same branch.
Right. One is eating.
One of them is only watching, the Sakshi. The other is enjoying, right?
Right.
So you have the mind and the Atman. So the Atman is also like the light, right? So what falls in the mind becomes becomes physically distinct. In Atman, you have everything. It's infinity. But what the light, as it falls on the mind, becomes embodied, and therefore only one of the or a countable number of possibilities of the
become one
infinity. So from many, it becomes one within us. And that is the very heart of quantum mechanics. And this is what opens up everything. And that is the foundation that you have in the Vedas, or you have in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's saying, since your name is Krishna as well, Krishna's saying that I'm within everybody.
Yes.
Right? Or you can use either Krishna's image or Shiva. They're the same. Harihara, right? One, or depending upon what your temperament in relation to how you want to relate to the mystery. You can either relate through the power of yama and niyamas, of rectitude, of morality, that is Krishna. Or you can do it through freedom, pure freedom, that is Shiva. And freedom has two aspects. It has the fierce aspect, which is Rudra or Aghora, or it has the pleasant aspect, which is Vamadeva or Parvati. It has both aspects. Freedom has both aspects. It has heat, before it becomes light. It has, when you burn something, firstly it's hot, fingers can get burned. That is the Raudra part. But then the light emerges, which is the beautiful part, which is what liberates us.
Lovely. Beautiful. So yes, I know this is a very vast subject, Subhashji. This, how Indians have and our knowledge systems have affected or influenced the world over. But could you, you did name Schrodinger. Maybe could you quickly just name a few scientists that one knows of the famous ones who've been influenced by? Because I think Bertrand Russell was another one who have been influenced by Indian knowledge systems, Indian philosophy. Just a few names.
Almost everybody that you can think of, the greatest physicists. There are in quantum mechanics there are different interpretations. One is called the Copenhagen or the orthodox interpretation. The orthodox interpretation, according to most discerning people, is perfectly consistent with Vedanta. Perfectly consistent, because in the orthodox interpretation, you always have material reality and consciousness as two different aspects. Just as you have a coin, on one side you have one image, on the other side you have the other, so that you cannot have one without the other. So if you were to say, where is consciousness? Well, consciousness is everywhere in all of material reality. And so there are two different aspects. And this is the orthodox interpretation, which is totally consistent with Vedanta. And this is the dominant interpretation. So the greatest physicists, and most of them accept the orthodox interpretation, and not just Schrodinger. You look at Heisenberg. Heisenberg was the other creator. You had Schrodinger and Heisenberg. Heisenberg came to Vishwabharati in the late 20s, and then he said that, look, all of this quantum mechanics makes sense. He had conversations with Ravindranath Tagore, right? And he says, now it makes sense, because really this is the way you can look at it. Because there the idea is that, and in philosophy, it's called positivism. You cannot speak of things as they are without speaking of the interaction between the observers and things. So therefore, to speak of, if there's nobody in the forest and a apple falls, and forest of apple trees, and if apple falls, will there be a sound? Well, that's a meaningless question. In this view, meaningful questions are only related to interaction between observers and the reality. And in other words, you must look at everything as a complex of the inner and outer. And likewise, we spoke of the body, of the mind and the body. And if you insist on looking only at the body, at some point, your whole system will fall very short, as seems to have happened with allopathy. Which is not to say that we shouldn't embrace allopathy. Is great, as far as the body is concerned, surgery, etc. But it totally falls short because it doesn't have any means of speaking of the mind.
Subhashji, you've also spoken about the influence of the Indian, for example, the presence of Sanskrit names and Sanskrit words in various cultures geographically across the globe. I mean, for example, you've spoken about the Slavic gods having Sanskrit names or Indian or Vedic names, right? So what was the extent of the Indian, the influence of the Indian, or let's say the Hindu culture or Hindu practices, beliefs, or Sanskrit language, culture really? What was the extent, the geographical spread of the Indian culture? And could you speak a little bit about this, the fact that Slavic gods have Sanskrit names or Vedic names, or they could in fact be Vedic gods themselves? Just a little bit on that.
Oh, incredible. The influence was incredible all over the ancient world, as we know, and Southeast Asia, it's generally accepted. You have great temples there. Harihara was a great image which was used all over as the one inspiring royalty. You go to Champa, or you go to Khmer, which is Cambodia, and certainly Indonesia, Java and all over. And in fact, the Javanese slogan, which is part of the state right now, says that Shiva and Buddha are the same. In fact, there is a Javanese poem, Vishwa, where the actual name that is used is Vishwa for Shiva, because Shiva is also Vishwanatha, right? So Vishwa and Buddha are the same. So it was generally accepted. They were, Buddhism and Hinduism being different is a modern myth. You look at all these kings and queens, they worship both the Buddha and Shiva or Vishnu and all that. And in fact, even now in temples all across East Asia, China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, one of the most popular chants, which is chanted in Sanskrit even now, is called Nilakanta Dharani.
Nilakanta
Dharani.
Oh, it's a chant, is it?
It's a chant in Sanskrit, and they write it in Chinese characters. But how they do it is they extract the syllables from the first, Chinese characters come with correspondences with some number, with some names. So they take the first part of that syllable and the second part of the second one, and that's how they code the Sanskrit sounds. So Nilakanta Dharani, in this, Avalokiteshvara, which is one of the bodhisattvas, the most perfected bodhisattva. In fact, the worship right now in all of China, etc., is of a feminine form of Avalokiteshvara called Guan Yin. In fact, the great images that you have is to Avalokiteshvara. In this Nilakanta Dharani, Avalokiteshvara is worshipping both Vishnu and Shiva, and he worships Shiva himself. This is Avalokiteshvara worshipping. And he says, worshipping Nilakanta, he says, you who drunk halahal poison to save the universe, you are the pratik, the symbol of compassion, of karuna. Because, after all, bodhisattvas symbolize karuna, compassion. So even now, you have this dharani and many other Sanskritic dharanis. So they are a part of living religion, which according to Ananda Kumaraswamy is equivalent to Sanatan Dharma. But academics and politicians are insisting now that they're different. But in any event, we see this great sweep everywhere. in Zen religion or Zen Buddhism, Zen is of course Dhyan. Dhyan in Sanskrit became Chan in Chinese, became Zen in Japanese. They even use Sanskrit letters in Siddham script, which is related to it's related to the Devanagari script, actually the Gupta form of the Devanagari script. So all of these things are still alive. And some people believe that Buddhism has anatma and so on, but on his own deathbed, the Buddha accepted, this is described in this very longish and influential Mahaparinirvana Sutra. He described that after death, yes, something persists, which is what Veda is all about, Atman. Atman always, or in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So he said, yes, it persists. So that the very heart of Buddhism as practiced in East Asia, and this is something that Dalai Lama would acknowledge any moment, is what is Hinduism. But now to talk about the westward push, the Zoroastrians also introduced or accepted Maheshwara as a divinity equal to Zarathustra. So this is in Samarkand and so on before it became Islamicized. All of Xinjiang, they used to speak Indian languages. Gandhari is a Middle Indo-Aryan language, and Sanskrit, not following all the rules. So it's sometimes called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit. And Khotanese, which are also Sanskritized. In fact, Fayan and Hyun Sang, when they traveled through Central Asia on their travels to India, they said, well, people in Central Asia read Indian books and they follow Indian religion, in Indian culture. But now westwards, the Slavic world was Christianized very late, after 1000. And the process was very violent. It's called the Northern Crusades. So the Slavs held on to their religion for a very long time. And in fact, they held on to it so strongly that sometimes people say that the Russian religion is doveri. Doveri meaning, do meaning two, veri meaning truths, like verities. Doveri, two truths, that they go to church and they do something, but at their home, they're holding on to their old ways. And in fact, something very amusing, when Christianity triumphed in Rome, they changed the way they circumambulated, if that was a part of their religious ceremony. Prior to that, it used to be clockwise, Dakshina, clockwise. So they reversed it and made it counterclockwise. But the Slavs refused that change. So in the Orthodox Church, in the Greek Orthodox Church or the Slavic churches, it's still clockwise. They said, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. So now what they've discovered is that the chief divinity of the Slavic world was called Svetovid, which is a very beautiful, beautiful Sanskrit etymology. Svetovid, the knower of light. Shweta is white, but it also can be seen as light. And Shwetavid, and it had four faces, just as Shiva is supposed to have four faces plus Ishana. Right? The fifth one, which provides grace. So the four faces, the north one was called Swarog or Swarga. The west one was called Parjanya or Percorus. The south face was called Lada, which is a name for the earth. And the east face was called Mokosh, which is Moksha. So, you have all these, Sanskrit is underlying a lot of the cultural stuff in the entire, not just the Slavic world, but also the Western European world, because there was a pathway not only overland through the Himalayan passes, there were also shipping going on between South India and Rome. In fact, there are Roman authors writing about 200 BCE saying that Rome is going to get bankrupt because we are importing so much of spices, from South India. And they have discovered these hordes of golden coins, Roman coins at many places in South India. So a lot of the stuff from India went to Europe, Western Europe primarily, from over the water route, over the shipping lanes. And so there is so much of similarity there. Just as you had three classes, three main, the people, the Kshatriya and the Brahmins, in terms of classification of function, not necessarily that you couldn't be flexible. All of these jatis were flexible.
Very flexible. Yeah.
In any free society, people can do and join, and they say, well, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to run my own temple, which is what's happening in the West. Or you go to Champa, you even have the ones who didn't convert to Islam amongst the Cham people. There are about 20% who are Hindus, and they call themselves the Balaman, which is Brahman.
Where is this?
Champa is Vietnam. The Cham people, the state of Champa was after the Cham people. And the Cham people are one of the ethnic groups in Vietnam.
Oh.
And the Hindus who are there, sadly, India has forgotten about them. They call themselves the Balaman. Now, in Europe, in Rome, there were three classes also. The top were the light, the keepers of the light, and they were called the Flamans, like the Brahmins. The Flamans. So you had the similar tripartite function. And this tripartite function is fundamental to the Vedic way. Trividya. The Vedas are Trividya. This Vidya has three aspects, right? I already mentioned Bhu, Bhuva, Swaha. The body, the atmosphere. The body is the Bhautik Sharir. Bhuva is the pranas, and Swaha is the Atman, which resides within you. Right? So everything is three. And likewise, in social function also, you have the general population, and then you have those, and this is within each, because in the Purusha Sukta, it's stated that the Purusha then manifests itself in different sectors of society. You have the people who are doing the teaching, or people who are doing the protecting the thing, the soldiers and so on. But this is within each one of us. Each human being has different roles. Each human being is also a teacher and teaching their children, or indirectly their friends and everybody else.
Contributing to the knowledge.
Contributing. Each person must also do to obtain the money that is needed to be done to sustain their family.
Right.
So each person is a Brahman, each person is a Kshatriya, each person is a Vaishya, and each person is a Shudra as well. Absolutely. Because within each human being are all the divinities. In fact, who is, where does the divinity, where does Vishnu resides in the feet, right? Because Vishnu is the Adhara of the entire
Jagat.
Right, of the Jagat, right.
Very interesting. I would now come to the, what's happening in India. I know you're someone who's outside looking in. What is your honest opinion, if I may ask you that, of the present dispensation? And I mean, would you like to give an honest appraisal of, what you think have their triumphs and failures have been, of what's happening currently with the, do you think, what is your opinion as somebody who's outside, who's not living or residing in India?
As someone looking in from outside, India is in a very interesting period right now, because India was colonized very subtly but very comprehensively by the British for 150 years. And when they handed over power to elites who wanted to really perpetuate the system. And maybe they wanted to perpetuate the system because they were not confident, because this idea of racism were still very powerful in Europe as well. And this current idea that everybody is equal was not really something that was widely, at least internalized, because I remember reading Nehru's autobiography, and he speaks of when he went to Europe to study, he found that Indians were maybe 6th or 7th down the totem pole. You had the Nordics, then you had the French, then you had the Italians, then you had the Slavs. In fact, some people say the Slavs are called Slavs because the Westerners, the Nordics, took them as slaves. You know, you had this whole sequence, right? And the Indians were darker, and therefore they were at the bottom. And I think after independence, we operated from this acute sense of inferiority. So we wanted to just do what the pundits back in London would say is correct. We only wanted to do that way because we didn't have the confidence. But now, you know, in the early 90s, there was this huge economic shock when India was almost bankrupt, and India couldn't feed itself. Then Indians went out, and each Indian who went out went through a process of great churning. You know, this Samudra Manthan that must take place in every human being. And we had to do away with a lot of these attitudes which we had been taught in the schools in India and through the educational system and through the entertainment system, which had been placed in our minds. And then people realized, I remember in the early 90s, people in the Silicon Valley saying that, look, we just discovered we are as good as anybody else. Right. And now, of course, you know, they are the most powerful entrepreneurs that you have anywhere, or thinkers, or, you know, any particular field. So they realized what they've been told was wrong. And this has started percolating back to India, especially through the social media. And now, you know, the power of the old establishment is getting weaker and weaker, because the old establishment was the libraries, the universities, they curated everything, or the powerful newspapers, they curated. They said what was to be believed and what was not to be believed. But now that's all gone. Although this is a problem that has emerged in the West now. You know, America is also going through a big churning because America is sensing that they may be losing power to Asia, right? China, they can't compete with the Chinese. So there is an attempt, even in America right now, to throttle questioning of the establishment view. And in fact, part of what's going on between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is a playing out of this struggle. But in India, the establishment until the 90s completely throttled questioning. This is what we have to do. And people had no choice. We could barely, you know, get a job and survive. Right. That has changed. Indians cannot be held back. Not only cannot be held back, Indian ideas are sweeping the world. You go to any country. In fact, I came across this wonderful lady from Saudi Arabia 3-4 years ago at a conference in Delhi, and she was speaking about how even the Saudis want to do yoga. Saudi women are doing yoga, and they knew that the mullahs would be against it, so they slipped it in through the Ministry of Sports. So they're saying it's good for your health. But you know, the asanas are the doorway to opening the mind. Yoga is sweeping the entire world. You go to China, you go to Russia, you go to South America, it's everywhere. So Indian ideas are going everywhere, and the average Indian recognizes it. I think the greatest opposition to all of this wisdom is not in the West. I found people totally open. I think is still in India.
Within India.
It's in India. It's the people who do this, who write these copies, you know, in newspaper about the festivals that you say. They try to denigrate everything that Indians have done. You know,
Yes.
they want to make fun of the bindi also. You know, you've got
Yes.
to copy the Westerner in everything. If the Westerner doesn't have bindi, you shouldn't have it,
You should
because
have.
you have to be totally secular. The word
Exactly.
secular is being used as a way to beat down on Hinduism, which is so ridiculous and shocking. I think Indians are saying enough is enough. And this is, first of all, it's not even sectarian. Hinduism is universal knowledge. You know, Vedas are universal knowledge. It's not even sectarian. We are not even saying that somebody else is inferior or whatever. We are saying that, look, this is a beautiful way of understanding yourself, of going through this pathway of knowledge. And you can also join us. Everybody can join us. And people are joining us everywhere. In the West, most people, I think I hope I get her name right, Judith Miller, maybe not Judith Miller, I forget, that was another lady. This lady wrote a very famous column in Newsweek about 15, 20 years ago, titled, "We Are All Hindus Now," in America. She was talking about America, in the sense that, look, what is Hinduism? Its belief in many ways lead to the same understanding, right? Ekam sat vipras bahuda vadanti, right? So that's one, which is very different from authoritarian.
The Abrahamic point of view, yes.
Yeah, so people can do it differently. People can do different kinds of sadhana. You may not even want to go to a temple because that doesn't agree with your temperament. That's perfectly fine. You may just want to do dance. You may just want to do music. Music is your sadhana. Or you may want to go and walk in the forest. That's perfectly fine too. This is open. This is freedom, right? Hinduism is about freedom. So this is one. The other is 80-90% of the Americans now believe in reincarnation. It's not that one has to even believe in reincarnation to be a Sanatani, to be a Hindu, but you know, many people do because it seems to make sense. Or what else is Hinduism? That Atman, that there is something which is within you, and which is
even the idea of karma, Subhashji.
The idea of karma, absolutely. I think most Westerners have claimed it, have adopted it.
They say karma, yes.
Absolutely. I think, you know, if they estimates that 90% of Europeans are not practicing Christian anymore, or 90% of Americans or Canadians or South Americans have not, then who are they? They've started following Sanatan Dharma without knowing it, or they are going back to their old ways. In Russia or in Lithuania, they're talking of Romuva, which is their old pre-Christian religion, and Romuva is from Rama. Or in Russia, they're talking of it's called something with rod from Rudra. So they're all trying to go back because Sanatan Dharma is universal verities, universal truths which emerge from the very depths of one's own consciousness. And the ultimate reality is consciousness, because whatever exists in the physical world also is taken by us in our consciousness. Ultimately, it exists in our consciousness, right? Now, you are in my consciousness, so I'm in your consciousness because we are watching each other. But so we are not, so this is the heart of Sanatan Dharma. And I think this is, if it's true, if gravity is true, ultimately everybody would acknowledge that gravitation is a force. And if this is true, people all over the world, even if they are not being allowed at this moment for whatever reason, because a lot of what goes on in the world is about domination, it's about control. Absolutely. But eventually people want to be free. They want to be connected to truth. And this is the truth.
Right. So I think perhaps the dispensation, current dispensation post 2014 has made it conducive for these ideas to be talked about more openly. I think before, 2014, before BJP came into power, I think some of these things were not talked about, like you pointed out, the trajectory of how things have happened over the years. And I think perhaps one of the biggest successes or one of the biggest triumphs would be that today we're talking about these things. And I think that's also a blessing of the social media, because we're able to
the social media, but in India, there's also a big struggle. Politically, the struggle is that the old establishment is fighting all these changes because the old establishment is still informed by old racist Eurocentric ideas without being aware that this is what it is. See, in Europe, they've abandoned these things as being regressive. But I think the last bastion of this racism is the internalized racism of the Indian left elite.
Absolutely.
And for them, Sanatan Dharma is a challenge because they say that this is against the very idea of progressivism, materialism, because knowledge has accumulated slowly over ages. So who are these guys, who are these crazy guys who are saying that we've known a lot of this stuff before? Well, that's because your paradigm is not complete. Materialism is not complete. Material reality is not the only thing. You also have another reality, psychological or reality or consciousness, which is the frontier of all of sciences. You look at physics or neuroscience or computer science, the ultimate frontier is consciousness, right? Why the computer is not conscious while the brain machine is conscious. And the problem with the Indian establishment, old establishment elite is that their understanding of what modern science is so totally flawed. They're stuck in the 19th century materialist paradigm of Marx and Lenin and Newton, right? Although, as we said, Newton was also an alchemist. Maybe secretly he knew that this wasn't true. So I think the problem in India is this, pushback by people who are ignorant, totally ignorant. And I'm sure if all of this were to be presented to them in a way that they don't find threatening, that we are not talking of mumbo jumbo, we are not talking of belief in bizarre things, we're not talking about hydrogen bomb in ancient times. These are also literary devices when you talk of all of these things. We are talking of knowledge at its frontiers, which all wise people all over the world accept as indeed the way to make progress. And I guess the challenge is, how do we open the eyes of the old establishment in India? I'm sure in their heart, they also want to know the truth, but they're scared of it. So that's why they use slurs. They use name calling. They use words such as, this is Hindutva, or whatever. This is totally stupid. We are not talking of any of that. We are talking of open knowledge, equal. There is no jati that is a Western, that is a European idea. Every jati is equal. There's nothing like one caste. First, I never use the word caste. One jati over another, totally wrong. Everybody, every human being is equal. Every human being, all genders are equal. That is the heart of the Vedas.
So my last question, Subhashji, was that, and I think you kind of, I was going to ask you, what do you think going forward is India's biggest challenge today? So would you like to wrap up the conversation with perhaps just reasserting what you just said? What do you think is the biggest challenge?
Pujita ji, I think what we have to do is struggle harder or show more energy. Take charge. We can't always wait for the government to do it. We must take charge. The old structures are falling. The brick and mortar university is getting obsolete. We have this technology. We must learn also how to leverage it and create new ways of educating. I think India has already become a leader in ed tech across the world. You have billion-dollar Indian companies. Maybe as far as this knowledge is concerned, now many of these companies are still, doing the old, what is to be memorized kind of knowledge, right? We are talking of something much deeper, and perhaps the Festival of Bharat is one of those efforts. Seriously, I really laud you for what you are doing, and there are many other efforts like this as well. And we just want to keep on focusing on openness, on truth, and bring this light to everybody. This is universal. This is ultimately, Bharat is not just a geographical area.
Yes.
Bharat is ultimately the whole globe. So how do we take Bharat beyond the borders and bring this knowledge to people who are in such despair? In America last year, 100,000 young people died of drug overdose. These are healthy people, beautiful children. Why are they doing it? Because the old materialist model, which the establishment in India wants to hold on to because they
wants to emulate. Yes.
They want to emulate. That model has run out of steam. That doesn't bring comfort to people. They're looking for something else. They go into drugs, but they don't have to go into drugs. If you only open up your heart and do a journey into your heart, not only will you see that we are all connected, we are all truly connected, because Purush is one, we are all one. And we can then see that compassion flow through us to everybody, to all sentient beings, not just us. We can also see this commonality as we do when we see these beautiful nature films. We can even relate to a octopus, for example, to other creatures. Why don't we bring that happiness to everybody? I think if we do that, that is the greatest challenge that faces us, because the rest of the world has perhaps too many established power centers to make it happen easily. India is a region where, because of our tradition, we find it more easy to ask the big questions. And since we have the answers to these big questions, our challenge is, how do we bring these answers to not only Indians, because we must first of all liberate Indians, bring Sanatan Dharma to Bharat. To Bharat. Once we have brought it to Bharat, then it'll go everywhere else.
Yes. Thank you, Subhash, for those wonderful words. And truly said, India is not just a geographical entity. It is the fount of consciousness, and the fact that we're all connected. And that's what the whole idea of Sanatan Dharma is: endless, no beginning, no ending. It's one stream of consciousness, and we're all connected, and that's the idea that needs to be promoted. So thank you so much, Subhash. I'm sure a lot of our viewers, many of them are very young, I'm sure that they learned a lot by listening in today, and I hope they were listening in. Thank you so much, Subhash, for your time, and we'd love to have you again sometime so that you could share your wealth of knowledge with all of us. Thank you so much, Subhash.
Thank you, Bujiraji. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel if you are a drifting browser and you like our content. Like and share widely. We're available on all social media platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Insta, we're on Facebook. So until we meet again, namaskar.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.